So the next team we have in our team previews are the Houston Rockets. They finished with a 41-41 record last season. They finished in the 11th spot in the standings in the Western Conference, and they did not make the play-in. They barely missed it. They picked up Reed Shepherd in the draft. That was pretty much their biggest key addition during the offseason. They have a lot of very young talent, so they didn't really have a whole bunch of open spots that they needed to fill. With all that being taken into consideration, what are your thoughts on the Houston Rockets going into this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think the Rockets are another team to keep our eye on. My concern with them is just the youth on the team. I do think Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks do help out a lot with some veteranship and some experience. But I still do think that a lot of these players have some room to grow. When you look at Jabari Smith Jr., he just hasn't had that explosive season. I think he's actually been very solid. Just when you have a lot of young players around you and it's not really anybody that can operate things like a Chris Paul, like we spoke about earlier, it's kind of hard for you to kind of find your footing, especially as a big man, when a lot of your shots are really going to depend on the guards getting that penetration and having the awareness to kick out and find the open guy, especially in today's game with just the spacing that we find ourselves in with this era. And, Jalen Green had his own development process going on. And I think when Alperen Şengün was injured for the rest of the season last year, you really saw Jalen Green take that next step. And honestly, it's looked the best since he's been in the league. But obviously, you want to see that work out with your best player. I mean, yeah, not necessarily sure who to say the best player is, but I think Şengün has been the most consistent performer on that Rockets team. But you see the upside with Jalen, you see the upside with Jabari and guys like that. They drafted Cam Whitmore, who has shown flashes of being able to be that three or that four, like a big body, strong, athletic player that you can throw into the mix. Drafting Amen Thompson, he's been a point guard pretty much his whole basketball career. And you look at him as more of like that three small forward position, can do pretty much everything, both ends of the ball, high athleticism. And it's just a lot of pieces you're trying to really figure out. And it's kind of like almost like an extreme version of the homegrown players that we talked about earlier, because all these guys were like top 10 picks. So it's like you're really trying to figure out who is going to be the players that you go forward with. And I think there's still a lot to figure out, but I can honestly see them getting in the play-in as well. I'm not seeing guaranteed top six potential, but I think you do have some questions about what you're going to do with which player. When you look at the veteranship, like I mentioned, of Fred VanVleet, obviously you want Reed Shepherd to develop. He's shown a lot of good flashes in the summer league, like just his pace, his ability to knock down the three as well. I've seen him in Kentucky, but I didn't know he was that great of a point guard, to be honest, just because he was playing alongside another great player in Rob Dillingham and, other people in Kentucky. Coach Cal is big on everybody pretty much being involved and stuff. So it's a lot of questions because just not knowing, but I think that can also play to your advantage as well because you're just kind of figuring things out and you're letting things happen. But I would say, just due to their youth, I want to hold back a little bit on what I think they'll be, but I think they have a chance to make that play-in seeding. It's a lot of reasons to like them. Hopefully, they can take that momentum that they found at the end of the season and carry it into this next season. It's going to take a lot of professionalism, a lot of commitment, a lot of accountability on all these young players. I think they're starting to find some kind of footing. I really like Emi Udoka. I think he's already had a great impact. If there was a year for them to take that next step, I think it would be this year just because of the amount of years the guys have been in the NBA. You would expect them to be ready to take that next step now. So they're going to have to find a brand of consistent basketball. I think they have the head coach to possibly do that. And I think they have the players that if they can find their roles and mesh well, I think they can definitely be a team that we're seeing in the play-in.
Yeah, I think you had a really good point there about their youth and the amount of experience. Last year was a really good example of it because it was like a roller coaster, man. They had a lot of really high moments, but they also had a lot of really low moments. And in those high moments, you see the talent, you see the potential, and you see how good this team can potentially be, right? But then they would have a lot of low moments where you're like, yeah, that's that youth showing and the lack of experience and not being poised. So it was a really erratic season. They would have like 4 or 5 games where they would go on a streak and win all of them, and then they would go on like a 3 or 4 game losing streak, right? So a lot of really good moments, but then they would just follow it with a lot of really bad moments. The last part of the season was a really good example of it. They went on like an 11 game win streak, right? They had the ability to win a game and stamp their ticket to get into the play-in and then possibly get into the playoffs, right? And then they go and lose like 4 or 5 games straight after that. So this team is really talented, and I think you said it very well. I think Ime Udoka is a really good coach for this. We saw it when he took the Boston Celtics to the finals in his first year as the head coach there. We saw how well he relates to the players and how he figures out the best way to motivate them to become better. And I think that's a really good coach for this situation. They have a chance to be really good, but it's just putting it all together and trying to figure out how to do that. I'm really interested to see what the rotations are going to look like because it's almost like they just have too much talent a little bit. Like there's legit 10, maybe even 11, maybe you could say the whole roster has an opportunity to get a large chunk of the minutes, right? But we all know that that's really not how things work in the NBA, but in basketball in general, usually teams don't go 10 to 12 deep, right? So I'm really interested to see what that pecking order will be and who will get the minutes and who they pretty much choose to develop as they go along. We all know Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks have those bigger contracts. So does that play into the decisions on who plays and which young guys do you want to kind of lean into developing, and how does this team really come together and mesh? So I really like Reed Shepherd. I think he showed a lot in the summer league, and Jalen Green is on that upward trajectory. He has a lot of upside, but they have other really talented players as well.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because it's almost like you can't really have too much talent, but it's just makes it that much harder to figure out what your best. Typically, if you're a championship team looking to make a deep playoff run, typically your best eight. So you already mentioned that they got like 10, 11 players. That's automatically cutting a few of those off. And then you also have to think about your role players like your Deshaun Tates and people like that who provide so much that may fit well with all the other players just because they excel at things that the other guy may not, or are more willing to do the things that the other guy may not. And like I said, it's just early in the process. Like it's a lot of learning to go on, accepting a role, understanding that you can still be effective in your role. These guys are, like I said, pretty much all lottery picks or around lottery picks. So they've been more not catered to, but the teams have been more so set up around them. And it's just such a big adjustment when pretty much your whole life you've been playing ball like that. And you have to adapt to this new environment and other guys that may be getting the reps that you usually would. So now you have to find different ways to be effective in the game that you're not used to. And I think that a lot of them are capable of doing that. But just once again, it's the NBA, it's young players. So I just think we've been seeing them continuously grow each year. And last year was like a time where I think we really took them serious for the first time of possibly being a threat. And it's kind of pretty much on track with the timeline of what you would expect for a young and upcoming team. You're not really expecting them to take over and take the NBA by storm in their first, second, or even really their third year. You really want to see them progress. And this is pretty much the pace that you usually see that at, where players come into their own. Like I said, they were only 22 now. A lot of players don't reach their prime until they're about 27. So I'm expecting these next few years for us to really see them around that possible playoff seeding each season. So I think they're right on track. And I think, like I said earlier, this would be a year to expect them to be a threat and see some postseason basketball for the first time in a while in Houston.
Yeah, and we talk about the amount of talent they have and how they'll fit it all together and who's actually going to be getting minutes. But honestly, when you look at a lot of the teams, that's a problem that I think a lot of teams would like to have when you look at it. So it's like you said, it's going to be fun to watch how everything plays out and see if they can get to being that consistent perennial playoff team. When you look at this team defensively, they were in the middle of the pack, but they were really good at being disruptive with their young athletic players, getting steals, creating turnovers, getting out in transition, and that's when they were at their best. They weren't really good in the half court necessarily. They can get better at that, but as long as they continue to get better defensively and they improve their ability to execute in the half court, I think that this team can be a tough team to play against. And I think that they will, like you mentioned, be in the play in when it's all said and done.